The Sands Hotel and Casino in the summer of 1963 was not merely a building. It was a civilization unto itself, an empire of neon and velvet and whiskey-soaked ambition rising out of Mojave Desert, like a fever dream that refused to apologize for what it was. Inside, money moved like blood. Fortunes changed hands between the flicker of one cigarette and the lighting of the next. Chandeliers hung from above like frozen constellations, casting warm amber over men in perfectly pressed tuxedos and women draped in silk that cost more than most Americans made in a year. It was a kind of place where power was the only currency that truly mattered. And on the night of August 19, 1963, at exactly 11:45 p.m., that power was about to be tested in ways that nobody in the room could have predicted. Sammy Davis Jr. sat at a private blackjack table in the VIP alcove, the one reserved for people who didn't need to ask the price of anything. He was wearing a black silk tuxedo with a white pocket square folded sharp as a blade. His rings caught the light. His laugh filled the corner of the room the way it always did, warm and irresistible and entirely his own. He had just finished 2 sold-out shows. Standing ovations both. The kind of applause that doesn't come from politeness, but from something deeper, from an audience recognizing, without fully being able to articulate it, that they had just witnessed a once-in-a-generation talent at the absolute height of his powers. Sammy Davis Jr., in 1963, was not just a performer. He was a force of nature in a dinner jacket. He could sing, dance, play multiple instruments, tell a joke that made your ribs ache, and then pivot to a ballad so emotionally precise it left grown men blinking back tears they hadn't anticipated. He had conquered Broadway. He had conquered Hollywood. He had conquered Las Vegas. But in 1963, conquering a room did not mean you owned the room. Not if you were black. That was the paradox Sammy Davis Jr. lived inside every single night. He was a star of the show, and yet in the eyes of certain men, powerful men, entitled men, men whose privilege had calcified into something indistinguishable from cruelty, he was still the help, still something to be used and discarded, still something that could be humiliated for sport. Dean Martin was nearby. He usually was. The 2 men had built something over the years that defied easy categorization. It wasn't simply friendship. It was a kind of bond that forms between people who have chosen each other deliberately, consciously, in full knowledge of what that choice costs. Dean was at the bar with a glass of scotch, one elbow on the mahogany, talking to Jack and Tratter, the Sands' legendary entertainment director, about nothing in particular. He was relaxed. His tie was loose in one precise degree. His eyes, as always, were doing more than his face suggested. They were watching the room. They had been watching the room since Senator Gerald Holmes walked in. Gerald Holmes was a 2-term senator from a state that preferred not to be associated with what he was about to do. He was 61 years old, thick through the middle, with the kind of ruddy confidence that comes from having never truly been told no by anyone who mattered. He arrived at the Sands that evening with 4 associates. The word friends felt generous, and immediately made clear that he expected certain things. The best table, the best bottle, the fastest service, the kind of deference that powerful white men in 1963 Las Vegas received as a matter of course. He got all of it. That was not the problem. The problem was that Gerald Holmes was the kind of man who needed an audience, the kind of man for whom power was only meaningful when it was demonstrated, when it was performed, when someone else was made smaller so that he could feel larger. He had been drinking heavily since 9 o'clock. His voice had grown louder with each round. His associates laughed at everything he said, which only encouraged him further. Dean noticed the way Holmes looked at Sammy's table when he walked through the VIP room. He noticed the slight curl of the lip, the dismissive flick of the eyes. He'd seen that look his entire adult life, and it never failed to register something cold and specific in his chest. Not quite anger. Something more calculated than anger. Something that waited. Who's the senator? Dean asked Tratter quietly, and Tratter told him. Dean nodded once, set down a scotch, and said nothing more. But he didn't pick the glass back up, and his eyes didn't leave the room. At 11:30 p.m., Sammy was deep into a particularly good hand of blackjack, laughing at something the dealer had said, when Gerald Holmes appeared at the edge of the table uninvited. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, looking down at Sammy with an expression that mixed contempt with something theatrical. He wanted to be seen doing this. He wanted witnesses. He had chosen his moment deliberately. Sammy Davis. Holmes said, and the way he said the name was itself a form of diminishment. No, mister. No acknowledgement of the man's stature. Just 2 words dropped like a food order. Hell of a show tonight. You people have a real gift for entertainment. Sammy looked up. He'd heard the tone 1,000 times. He knew exactly what was happening. His face did what had been trained to do over 4 decades in show business. It stayed neutral. Professionally, surgically neutral. His eyes, however, said everything. Thank you, Sammy said, because that was the calculus men in his position had learned. Because surviving meant knowing which battles to absorb and which to fight. Because the consequences of fighting in 1963 Las Vegas were not theoretical. Holmes wasn't finished. He never was. Talented. Holmes continued, louder now so the surrounding tables could hear. But you always seem to forget your place, don't you? You sit up here like you belong here. Like you're one of them. He gestured vaguely toward the other guests. You're very good at what you do, Sammy. But what you do is entertain us, not sit among us. Then he reached across the table. He picked up a heavy crystal ashtray, the kind the Sands used, thick and expensive, the kind that said this place takes even its ashtrays seriously, and he tilted it slowly, deliberately, over Sammy Davis Jr.'s head. Ash and cigarette butts cascaded down. They fell across Sammy's silk tuxedo. They fell into his hair, onto his shoulders, onto the cards in front of him and the chips he'd been stacking. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet when something has crossed a line. So far that language hasn't caught up yet. Sammy sat perfectly still. His hands were flat on the table. His jaw was set. His eyes were looking at the green felt directly in front of him, at the ash now settling on his sleeve. He was trembling, not from fear, but from the specific, excruciating effort of containing something that had no safe outlet. Holmes laughed. His associates laughed. Somewhere behind them, a woman gasped, and then the laughter stopped. Dean Martin moved through the room without urgency. That was the thing people would remember afterward. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He crossed the casino floor at a pace that was almost leisurely, and yet something about the way he moved parted the crowd ahead of him without a word being spoken. People stepped aside instinctively. They could feel what was coming even before they understood it. He had set his scotch down on the bar. He had not picked it back up. He was not carrying a drink. He was not wearing his performative smile. He was wearing nothing on his face at all, and somehow that was more frightening than any expression a man could have manufactured. He stopped directly behind Senator Gerald Holmes. Holmes didn't hear him coming. He was still enjoying himself. He was still looking at Sammy with that smile, the smile of the man who has done something he considers funny and expects the world to agree. Dean's right hand closed around the back of Holmes' collar. Not grabbed. Closed. The way a man reaches for something he has already decided belongs to him. Holmes made a sound, startled, indignant, his drink sloshing. And then he was moving, his feet scrambling to keep up with the momentum that Dean Martin had already established for him, pulling him backward through the VIP room, through a side corridor lined with staff lockers, through a heavy door marked staff only that swung open with shoulder push, and out into the alley behind the Sand Hotel. The alley smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet, and motor oil, and the specific ambient decay that lives behind every glamorous building. There were trash receptacles and a generator humming, and the distant sound of traffic, and the muffled thrum of the casino's air conditioning system. Neon light from a sign above the service entrance painted everything in alternating red and gold. Holmes stumbled, caught himself against the wall, spun around. His face had gone through 3 colors in the span of 10 seconds. White with surprise, red with indignation, and now something between the two, the specific shade of a man recalibrating, remembering who he was, reaching for the armor of his status. Do you know who I am? Holmes demanded, straightening his jacket. I am a United States Senator. Do you understand what that means? I will end your career. I will have this place shut down. I know exactly who you are, Dean said. His voice was calm. Not the calm of a man who isn't angry. The calm of a man who has moved through anger into something colder and more purposeful. He reached into his pocket, produced a cigarette, and lit it with a silver lighter that caught the neon and threw it back. He exhaled slowly. You're Gerald Holmes. 2 terms. Committee on Commerce. You like to be seen at the right places and say the right things to the right people. You're connected without being important enough to be truly dangerous. And tonight, you just poured an ashtray on my friend's head in front of 50 witnesses because you had enough whiskey in you to feel 10 feet tall. Holmes blinked. Your friend. The word seemed to amuse him. You're defending that. Don't, Dean said. 1 word, delivered with the precision of a man who has thought carefully about how many words a situation actually requires. Don't finish that sentence. I've been patient with a lot of things in my life. Senator, that's not a word I'm going to be patient with tonight. Or any night. Not from you. Not from anyone. Holmes looked at the door behind Dean. He looked at the alley's far end. He was doing the arithmetic. He was a senator. He was 61 years old. He had never been in a situation like this. Not since he was young. Not since before the titles and the offices had wrapped him in a kind of impunity he had long since mistaken for permanent. He made a decision. The wrong one. You're going to hit a United States senator? Holmes said, and there was a sneer in it, an invitation to reconsider, an attempt to invoke his status as a shield. That's what you're going to do? Dean took another pull from the cigarette, looked at it, looked at Holmes. No, he said, I'm going to explain something to you. And when I'm finished explaining, you're going to understand a few things that no one in your life has apparently ever bothered to tell you. What happened next in that alley behind the Sands Hotel was witnessed by 2 people. A kitchen worker who came out for a smoke break, saw Dean Martin's expression and immediately went back inside, and a night security guard named Ronnie Palms, who later said simply that he had seen Dean Martin explain something to a man who needed explaining to, and that afterward, the explanation was very clearly understood. Dean set his cigarette on the edge of a metal trash receptacle with deliberate care. He rolled up his left sleeve, then his right, with the methodical attention of a man who does not want to ruin a good shirt. He folded his jacket over the receptacle. Holmes started to speak again. Senators are trained to speak. It's the one tool they trust above all others. The voice, the status, the invocation of consequence. You are making the biggest mistake of your political. Dean's first strike was not wild. It was not the haymaker or brawler. It was precise. A short, economical jab that caught Holmes across the jaw and snapped his head sideways with a sound like a cabinet closing sharply. Holmes crashed into the wall. He slid. He found his feet again, or tried to, but Dean was already moving, unhurried, positioning himself with the calm of a man running through a checklist. You walked into a room, Dean said quietly between what he was doing, where Sammy Davis Jr. had just given 2 of the greatest performances this city has ever seen. You walked past 2,000 people who'd been on their feet, and what you decided to do with that moment. A second strike, this one lower, into the ribs, the kind that doesn't break anything but teaches the body something it won't easily forget, was to make sure he knew he didn't deserve to sit down. Holmes was against the wall now. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. His face had connected with the metal edge of service vent in the wall, and the result of that contact was now scattered across the alley floor. 2 teeth, white against the dark pavement, catching the neon like discarded dice. He was not standing anymore. Dean retrieved his cigarette from the receptacle. Still lit, he drew from it and exhaled upward. Here's what's going to happen, Senator, he said, crouching down to meet Holmes at his current elevation, his voice entirely conversational. You're going to leave Las Vegas. Tonight, you're going to go back to wherever you come from, and you're going to think very carefully about what you decided to do this evening and why you decided to do it. And every time you open your mouth from now on to say something about what a person deserves based on the color of their skin, you're going to remember this alley. You're going to remember the smell of it and the sound of it and what the ground felt like. Holmes said nothing. His breathing was shallow. His eyes were tracking Dean with the unfocused look of a man whose confidence has been deconstructed faster than he could rebuild it. Tell Washington, Dean said, standing, that Dino sends his regards. And keep your mouth shut. There's not much left in it to show anyway. He put his jacket back on, adjusted his tie, straightened his pocket square. He walked back through the staff-only door and let it close behind him. In the time Dean was gone, Jack and Trader had quietly moved to Sammy's table. He'd gotten Ash cleaned up, gotten a fresh drink placed, gotten the ambient noise of the room building back toward normal. And Trader was extraordinary at this. He had been managing the Sand's impossible balancing act for years. The intersection of mob money, Hollywood glamour, political patronage, and genuine artistry. And he understood that the most important thing a room needs after something like what just happened is the illusion of continuity. But the people at the surrounding tables had seen everything. They had watched it happen in real time, and they were not fooled by the resumed piano music. They were watching Sammy, watching the door Dean had gone through, waiting to understand what had just occurred and what it meant. Frank Sinatra had appeared from somewhere. Frank always appeared from somewhere at the exact moment a situation required a certain kind of gravity. He was standing near Sammy now, not making a scene of it, just present, the way a wall is present. Joey Bishop was there too, quiet and alert in the way that funny men are when something isn't funny. Sammy sat with his fresh drink and did what Sammy Davis Jr. had done his entire career when the world reminded him of the gap between what he had achieved and what he was still not allowed to be. He contained it. He metabolized it into something usable. He breathed, and then the side door opened, and Dean walked back into the casino. His jacket was on. His tie was straight. He walked to the bar, nodded at the bartender, and sat down on the stool he'd vacated 15 minutes ago. "Another scotch," he said. Then he picked up his glass and walked to Sammy's table and sat down beside him, the way you sit beside someone at the end of a long day. Naturally, without ceremony, as if no particular explanation is needed for why you're there. He put his hand on Sammy's shoulder. "Why'd the music stop?" he said, loudly enough for the room to hear. "Sam, why has the music stopped?" The senator had to leave early. Wasn't feeling well. Apparently he's missing something. He paused. Several somethings. There was a beat of silence. And then Sammy Davis Jr. laughed. Not the performance laugh. Not the professional laugh he deployed like a tool. The real one. The one that came from somewhere unguarded. Somewhere that hadn't been reached in the last 20 minutes. It started low and then it filled his chest, and it came out at him like a pressure valve releasing, and it was the most honest sound in the room. The piano started back up. Slowly at first, then with conviction. Dean winked. By 2 in the morning, the story had reached Frank's inner circle. By 4, it had spread to the casino's back channels. The dealers, the pit bosses, the cocktail waitresses who heard everything and remember more than most people suspected. By morning, it had reached the entertainment industry's informal nervous system. The agents, the managers, the club owners who called each other about things that would never appear in a newspaper. Senator Gerald Holmes had been helped into a car by his associates at approximately 12:15 a.m. He was driven to Desert Medical, where he was treated for a broken rib, severe facial lacerations, and the loss of 2 upper front teeth. He gave his name as Gerald Hall. He did not file a police report. His associates did not file a police report. He was on a plane back east by noon the next day. He never returned to Las Vegas. He completed the remaining 8 months of his term in the Senate without distinction and declined to seek re-election, citing what his office described as a desire to spend more time with his family. His colleagues noted that he seemed, in that final year, somewhat diminished, quieter, less inclined toward the performative certainties that had once defined him. Word moved, as it always does, through the specific channels where it needed to move. Jack and Trader made 3 phone calls that morning. Short ones, informational in nature, the kind that leave no record but accomplish everything they intend to accomplish. The people he called told people they knew. The message was simple and clear. The Sands was a place where a certain kind of behavior would not be tolerated, and Dean Martin had demonstrated what that tolerance looked like in practice. Other entertainers heard. Black performers who had been navigating the Las Vegas circuit for years. Men and women who had developed the same survival instinct Sammy had, who had learned the same calculus of which humiliations to absorb and which to resist, heard that something had changed, that someone had drawn a line, not with a policy, not with a memo, with his hands and his presence and his willingness to walk into an alley and make a powerful man understand the physical reality of what he had done. The effect was real. It was not immediate, and it was not total, and it did not solve the structural ugliness that black performers face in Las Vegas and everywhere else. But it changed something in the room. It changed the calculation. Men who had been treating the sand performers with casual contempt suddenly understood that the culture had been wrong about something, or at least that someone was going to push back now, and that the someone doing the pushing was not a person you wanted to push back against. 3 days after Night of the Ashtray, Sammy found Dean in his dressing room before a show. Dean was at the mirror doing something with his cufflinks. The room smelled of his cologne and the ghost of cigarettes and the particular pre-show energy that performers carry in their bodies like a current. "You didn't have to do that," Sammy said. Dean looked up in the mirror, met Sammy's eyes in the reflection. "Do what?" "Dean, I don't know what you're referring to, Sam." There was the ghost of a smile. "I stepped out for some air. It's been a warm summer." Sammy sat down in the chair next to the makeup table. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Dean went back to the cufflinks. "He could make trouble," Sammy finally said. "He's a senator. He has people. He also has a dentist appointment." Dean said. Sammy looked at him. "And a lot to think about," Dean added, "besides making trouble for us." There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that exists between people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it back to each other. "I was going to keep playing," Sammy said quietly. After he did it, I was going to keep playing the hand and pretend it didn't happen, the way I always do. "I know, because that's how you survive. You absorb it and you keep performing, and you tell yourself that they can take your dignity for an hour, but they can't take the talent, and they can't take what you built." "I know, Sam. Except," Sammy stopped, pressed his hands together. "Except somewhere in there it stops being survival, and it starts being something else. It starts being permission. It starts being you telling them, do it again, because I'll take it, because I've always taken it, because that's what I'm here for." Dean was quiet. "What you did out there," Sammy said, "in front of everyone." And then he gestured vaguely toward the back of the casino. "You reminded me that I don't have to keep giving permission, that someone other than me thinks my dignity is worth defending, not just protecting, defending, actively, physically if necessary." He looked up. "That's not a small thing, Dean. You understand that? In my life, in this specific moment in history, what you did is not a small thing." Dean finally set down the cufflink. He turned and faced Sammy directly. Not in the mirror, but for real, the way you face someone when you want them to understand that you are being entirely serious. "I need you to hear what I'm about to say," Dean told him, "because I'm only going to say it once, and I mean every word of it." Sammy waited. "You are the most talented human being I have ever watched perform. In my life, in this industry, which is full of talented people, you are singular. And you spent your entire career performing at the highest possible level for rooms full of people who couldn't see all of you because they had decided in advance what you were. That is a tragedy. It is a genuine tragedy, and I have watched it happen, and I have not always done enough about it. And I'm not proud of that." "Dean, I'm not finished." His voice was steady. "That senator looked at you and saw something to be used, something to be reminded of its place. He did it in front of people. Because men like that need witnesses. They need the crowd's validation of their cruelty. I decided he needed a different kind of witness, the kind that doesn't validate." He picked up the cufflink again, turned it in his fingers. "You're my brother, Sam. I've said it before. I'll say it in front of any room, in front of any senator, in front of anyone in this country who needs to hear it. You are my brother. And if someone does to my brother what he did to you tonight, there's exactly one thing I know how to do about it. And I did it." The room was very quiet. "That's all it was," Dean said simply. "No more complicated than that." Sammy Davis, Jr. did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." And Dean Martin said, "Get some sleep. We've got 2 shows tomorrow." What emerged from the events of August 19th, 1963, was not a formal policy. It was not a statement or a contract or anything that could be pointed to in a document. It was something more durable than any of those things. A code, an understood unspoken, absolute code that Dean Martin made clear to anyone who interacted with him or with the Sands in the years that followed. Artists were not props. Performers were not property. What a man did on stage, the talent, the vulnerability, the extraordinary effort of transforming himself into something that moved other people was sacred. It was protected. It was not to be mocked or diminished or used as the raw material for someone else's power demonstration. And if you decided to violate that code in Dean Martin's presence, you were going to have a conversation about it in a location of Dean Martin's choosing. The code traveled with the Rat Pack. It became part of their legend in ways that the music and the films and the famous photographs never quite captured. Because the music and the films were about what they could do. The code was about who they were. Other entertainers, younger ones, artists coming up to the circuit in the mid-60s, would hear about the night of August 19th the way you hear about something foundational, not as gossip, but as instruction, as a model, as evidence that the world could work a different way if someone was willing to make it. There's a certain kind of courage that gets called reckless by people who have never needed to use it. The courage that doesn't calculate odds before acting. The courage that looks at a situation and sees not the risk, but the necessity. Dean Martin that night had every reason to do nothing. Holmes was a senator. The kind of trouble a senator could make was real trouble. The kind that reached into careers and licenses and a fragile ecosystem of entertainment industry relationships that kept a man working. The Sands existed in a specific and delicate balance of mob patronage and political tolerance. And upsetting a sitting U.S. senator was not a small thing. And Dean Martin did not care. Not because he was reckless, but because he had done the math and arrived at a different answer than the one caution would have recommended. The math was this. Sammy Davis Jr. was his brother. His brother had been humiliated. The humiliation was deliberate and public and designed to communicate something fundamental about what Sammy was and was not worth. And Dean Martin's position on that communication was simple, absolute, and non-negotiable. The senator eventually recovered his teeth, with dental implants, reportedly, at a clinic in Maryland, the records of which were kept notably private. He never recovered his certainty. Those two things are related. Dean Martin continued performing at the Sands for years afterward. He continued being exactly who he was, the man with the scotch and the loosened tie and the voice that made everything seem effortless, while also being, underneath all of it, someone who had decided a long time ago what things were worth defending and had never once reconsidered that decision. Sammy Davis Jr. went on to give what many critics would later call the finest performances of his career in the 3 years following that summer. Something had shifted in him. Something in the quality of his commitment to the stage, in the emotional depth he brought to material he might previously have held slightly at arm's length. When asked about it in a 1966 interview, Sammy said only that he had started to believe something he'd been performing for years, that the difference between performing belief and actually having it was the difference between imitation and art, and that someone had helped him make the crossing. He did not elaborate. He didn't need to. The Sand Hotel was demolished in 1996. The implosion was televised. Thousands of people stood in the Nevada heat and watched a building that had contained more history than most cities ever accumulate collapsing on itself in 11 seconds and become a cloud of dust drifting east on the desert air. The Copa room was gone. The private VIP alcove was gone. The side corridor with the staff lockers was gone. The door marked staff only was gone. The alley with its neon splash pavement and its smell of rain and motor oil was gone. But the stories weren't gone. Stories of that caliber don't go with the buildings. They travel in the people who carry them. In the entertainers who were told what happened and felt something change in their own relationship to the word deserve. In the journalists who wrote about the Rat Pack's brotherhood and couldn't quite explain why it felt different from ordinary friendship. And the fans who knew instinctively that something real had happened in that place and that the music was only part of it. Dean Martin died in 1995, the year before the Sands came down. At his funeral, Sammy's name was spoken more than once. At Sammy's funeral, 5 years earlier, Dean had been the one who could barely speak. The bond between them was documented in 100 photographs and recordings, but its true nature lived in moments that no camera caught. In the private conversation in the dressing room, in the hand on the shoulder, in the walk back through the staff-only door, in the specific, irreducible fact of a man who folded his jacket carefully before doing what needed to be done. Because that's what you do when something matters. You are careful with the things that can be preserved, and you are deliberate about the things that cannot be avoided. You walk into the alley without drama. You deliver the lesson without cruelty. You walk back in and order a scotch and ask why the music stopped. And you sit beside your brother, not because it's safe, not because it's smart, not because the odds favor it, because he's your brother. And some things are exactly that simple. In the summer of 1963, in a desert city built on illusion, two men, one white and one black, one from Ohio and one from Harlem, one who had never had to fight for his right to sit at the table and one who had fought for it every single day, demonstrated what it means when a person decides to make someone else's dignity their own problem. They demonstrated it in a showroom. They demonstrated it in an alley. They demonstrated it in the quiet conversation that followed. And in the decades of brotherhood that never wavered after. Gerald Holmes lost his teeth that night. He lost more than that. Dean Martin didn't lose anything. Some men never do. Not because they're lucky, but because they've already decided that certain things aren't negotiable. And when you live that way, when you draw your lines that clearly and defend them that completely, the world eventually stops testing them. It learns. The question this story leaves you with is not what happened in that alley. You know what happened. The question is simpler and harder and more personal than that. When the ashtray is tilting, when someone in your life is sitting there with ash in their hair and humiliation on their face, and no one is moving, what do? Do you pick up your drink? Or do you set it down?